Hello and welcome to Kechan Music Review. For years now, I've been listening to all sorts of music and wanted to create a channel where I talk about it in lieu of my two favorite music channels, Glumburger and Cactus Malpractice. I never did create that show for some reason, but recently I decided to take the leap of faith and just make a video about an album that I like. So that's what I did. For the first episode, I wanted to cover an album that checks a few of my boxes. It's also well known among enough people before I get to the obscure stuff I really want to talk about. I thought a bit about what the debut episode of the show would be, and I settled on Angine de Poitrine. They check a good few of my boxes. They're from Quebec, they use loop pedals, it's loud, it's weird, and they wear funny costumes. And that last one's really important. And with all that, I knew this would be the perfect starting point for my show. So let's get into this one. I present Volume 2 by Angine de Poitrine. I found this album when everyone did, April 2026. I was just looking at the front page of Album of the Year like some kind of schmuck, and I spotted this album right at the top, and I noticed that it had achieved must-hear status. And, this is a common occurrence for me, and when I look at the page for a new must-hear, I usually don't think to listen to it. And so, I just like keeping up with them, I guess. However, when I looked at the genres for this album, I noticed that the community had marked the genres as experimental rock. All right, you got me at the first one, but they really got me this next part because people had tagged it with uncommon time signatures and microtonal. And at this point, I was just looking for things to listen to, so I put this one on while I procrastinated on schoolwork. For the first 12 seconds of the first track, Fabiank, it was pretty much in line with what I expected. Then the drums and bass kicked in, completely catching me off guard. For the next few minutes, they started adding layers to this track, slowly bringing up the energy while stopping every few measures and changing up the drum pattern and guitar lines. As I go on, it will become clear that this is a pattern that they are very fond of using for their compositions. It continues this way for the next 3 minutes, and if the whole track went on this way, I wouldn't be complaining. But around 3 minutes in, it comes to an abrupt stop, and the guitarist plays this really funky bass line. Afterwards, they start speaking in some unintelligible language. Then they repeat the same process once again, building on previous licks and creating new complicated melodies on top of it. I realize I'm making this sound quite dull, but you just need to hear how fun this is, especially like when it gets to a certain point and they just hold that for a bit. But of course, this is only the first track, and by now I knew I needed to hear the rest. So next came Mata Zeklek, I think. Like all the tracks, this title's in their made-up language. On this one, they keep the energy from Fabiank and start with the sporadic staccato notes that quickly develop into this fast-paced frenzy of tones and almost melodies that descend and ascend in a somehow predictable fashion. Of course, this only lasts a minute or two until the guitarist decides to add some sort of confusing melody over it with unintelligible lyrics. They keep this up for the next minute when the guitarist taps the pedal, bringing everything down a bit before getting right back into what was established before. I can imagine this track would be a great time if their shows didn't sell out immediately. In the last 2 minutes, they quiet down once again and build on a new loop that eventually takes shape into being somewhat similar to what we had before. Next, we have the only track here that isn't around 6 minutes long with Sarnies. They start this one with a short pattern, which gives way into another funky bass line. And like happened in the past two tracks, they build on that, adding more melodies and bass lines on top of it, albeit with the required respite in between. However, unlike the last two, they spend this track's 4-minute runtime building on this one idea, letting it reach heights the past two just couldn't. Especially the part where the guitarist hits the distortion at the end. This is one of my favorites off this already great album, and it may have been my favorite if it weren't for the next track, Uts. This track brings some much needed variety to the album. It starts with this folk sounding melody that eventually gives way to harmonizations and bass lines, while the drummer gets some use out of the so far neglected tambourine. Then, 4 tracks in, we get one of the only guitar solos I could say this album has over all of that. Unlike the other tracks so far, the loop doesn't keep building, but instead we get some very funky improvisations. That is, till everything takes a huge turn about 2 minutes and 44 seconds in, when the guitarist starts hitting the same high-pitched couple of notes over and over again, and starts harmonizing over that by touching the notes just barely above the ones he was playing, and the drummer compensates by bringing up the intensity. This is definitely the most microtonal and dissonant this album gets, in my opinion. And that's kind of what I was here for. Around the 4-minute mark of this folk song turned anxiety-inducing dirge, it suddenly cuts out. In the ensuing silence, I thought, that was definitely something. Then about 5 seconds later, one of them yelled something in their language and started this ferocious, fast-paced tune. Of course, they managed to fit a guitar solo in one of the phrases, and the high-pitched chords start coming back. They managed to keep this manic energy going for the next 2 minutes, finally letting up with a staccato pattern at the end. This is probably my favorite off the album. It has an energy that the other tracks just lack, at least to me. Next, we have Your Zarad. This one, like the others, starts out with a single guitar lick followed by the arrival of drums and bass to the equation. So far, so good, but it kind of blends in among the other tracks to me. That is, until the guitarist starts playing this guitar phrase and bookending each lick with a screeching tone that, well, I'm not a guitarist, as you could tell by that back there. I'm pretty sure this was created by holding whatever the last note of the phrase was. Personally, I love the way that sounds. Because this is one of the 6-minute tracks, things quiet down about halfway through, and they start building on a different riff. Honestly, I don't have much to say about this one. It's more of the formula that has been established by this point. That is, of course, until the guitarist turns the bass loops off and starts building on the high-pitched loop from before. Then it turns into yet another dissonant jam. Lastly, we have Angor, which seems to be the only track here with a title that has an intuitive pronunciation. They started this one out by playing bass notes on the beat and adding on that for a bit. Once we introduce the melody 45 seconds in, the tambourine makes a comeback. After they build this up for about 3 minutes, the guitarist starts playing this vaguely Arabian sounding melody, but unlike the previous tracks, they don't really build on this, at all. managed to keep the energy on this one at about the same level for the duration of the track, if we choose to forget the drummer bringing things up briefly around the 4-minute mark. And once the drummer takes a break from the cymbals, it's hands off for the guitarist. Loop pedals are doing their thing, and the drummer is the only thing keeping this moving until we reach the end. When I finished this album for the first time, I really didn't know much about them. I thought this was a few people jamming out in some practice space in the basement of some bar in Saguenay, and the album cover was commissioned by them to make it look like they were some weird alien creatures. That is until wanting to find more, and I searched Angine de Poitrine live, and I bore witness to the fact that this band was 2 people that just looked like that. I could have sworn that this band had about 4 people from the first listen. It was also impossible to ignore the mass amounts of paper mache they were wearing on themselves. But what stood out to me the most was the complete mastery their guitarist had shown of the loop pedal. If you are seeing this, unless there's some miracle of the algorithm, you probably know who I am already. And you know that I create music myself. The backbone of everything I create is this loop pedal right here. I was very impressed by the way the guitarist seamlessly created loops and played over them without the brief overlapping effect that I am very accustomed to when making music. Like, seriously, the way the loop pedal is its own instrument cannot be overlooked here. Without it, I think this would be a very different band. Another thing I want to touch on is the fact that we have no real idea who either of these people even are. Officially, the guitarist's name is the unpronounceable Kun, or like KHN de Poitrine, while the drummer is named the slightly more pronounceable Clec de Poitrine. It's pretty obvious that these are pseudonyms. Apparently, they had a band before this one where they would perform as their human form, but they seem to want that to be forgotten as they have never said what that band was called. I also learned that their whole paper mache alien shtick became a thing because they were booked twice at the same spot in the same week and wanted it to seem like they were 2 different bands performing that week. Then they just decided to roll with it. And personally, I love that. I almost don't want to know who they are. They are Kun and Kleck, and there are no costumes. They just look like that. It does seem that these creatures mature as they age, as Angine Tuber's spectral snail goes into in this video. I should also go into the making of the guitar and the drums, which I did not get into because, as previously stated, I'm not a guitarist or a drummer, so I don't really know what I'm talking about. But if you need a cursory overview, it seems the guitarist has a Boris-style guitar and bass on the same thing, and has double the frets so you can get those in-between notes. Davey 504 created a similar effect in this video using zip ties. The frets are also glow in the dark and alternating red and green, so we could see the really complicated stuff he's doing through the dollar signs over his eyes. If you need to hear more about the guitar, I will direct you to Davey 504's video in the description. And that's all I wanted to say about this album. Although this is not my favorite album this year, something about these guys has stuck in my mind. I don't know if it's the costumes or the loop pedal or the combination of the two. Let's be real, it's the combination of the two. But they have created something that seems to have lodged itself in my brain to the point I feel the need to make a whole video about it. I feel this would be a good place to start because the album has become surprisingly popular for what it is, the loop pedal action, and how could I forget the fact this is created by 2 beings from some unknown distant planet who are made of paper mache. I'm not sure how long this series will go on for. I'm going to college and starting work and stuff, so episodes are probably going to be a bit sporadic, but it should be a fun little thing, maybe as warm-ups for schoolwork or distractions from it. After all, anyone who knows me knows that there are few things I like talking about more than music I like. And I've been watching other people talk about music they like for years now, so hopefully this will be fun. I won't try to keep a schedule with this. I'll come out when I feel like it. That's it. Goodbye. The next episode will be on Heavy Eye the Sun's first album.